There's been a lot of reflection on why Trump won the last election, and I think the main conclusion that people seem to be coming to is that the Liberals failed to give a populist, viable alternative. And also, I think a key component is the power of right wing influencers like Joe Rogan, who's the biggest podcaster in the world, Theo Von, Aidan Ross, and these people who really got the message out there to young people, young men, and there's a failure to get people excited by the Liberals, energize people with a populist message. But I think there's another component too, and that's the fact that Trump is a cult leader. And there's a lot of people who are victim to this cult mentality that Trump has. He's a narcissist, he's a manipulator. And I think people are susceptible to cults, more susceptible than they'd like to think. And I think we need to give people sympathy and empathy and treat a certain amount of people who vote for Trump as victims of misinformation, victims of propaganda, victims of lies, victims of a narcissist abuser. And I think, although, again, some people wanted that, people know who he is, a lot of people are also in denial and buy into the lies that he is a good guy. He's the victim. He's the, persecuted one. So I want to get into a video with an interview of a expert in cults, Dr. Steve Hassan, who was in a cult himself. He wrote a book a few years ago in 2019 called The Cult of Trump. And he breaks down how and compares Trump to other famous cult leaders like Jim Jones, Hubbard, the Moon cult that he was a part of. And I think we can't underestimate the power of Trump as a cult leader. So let's get into the video and break down what he says about Trump as the cult leader.
I know that you wrote a book, Dr. Hassan, called The Cult of Trump. Can you help us understand the cult of Donald Trump?
Yes, the cult of Donald Trump is best described as him, first of all, as the absolute leader who demands total obedience, who has a malignant narcissist personality, which is the stereotypical profile, by the way, of other cult leaders. But the specific pyramid structure controls people's behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, and demands complete obedience. So in that cult, people have a black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil mindset. They're controlled through fear and manipulation of information. They have phobias that are installed in their heads, thinking that if they disobey, terrible things are going to happen to them. And really, people have reported it, and I was in the Moonies cult myself, so I can tell you firsthand. It's like a radical personality change where your real integrity, your conscience is put aside by this new cloned identity that suppresses you. And fortunately for me, I was deprogrammed at the request of my family, and I started to reality test again, and that's what's led me for 44 years to help others get out of destructive authoritarian cults.
And that's the big point of a cult. Like, no one thinks they're in a cult. No one will admit, again, because you don't know. Like, I pose this question to you. How do you know you're in a cult? No one knows. You need someone outside to kind of assess if you're in a cult. And everybody is susceptible to it. I think it's the people who think they're not susceptible who are more likely to be susceptible. Because, again, people are vulnerable. We have a post-truth era where misinformation and lies are constantly spread. And people are susceptible in different ways. For example, younger people who are outcasts, often who may abuse drugs, don't fit into society, may be susceptible to a cult. Also, people who've had bereavement, illness, death, divorce, a low point in their lives where they will be more susceptible, emotionally vulnerable to a lying narcissist who will exploit them, who exploit their good intentions and often good nature for their own gain. And I think that's what Trump does. He is a malignant narcissist who knows exactly what he's doing. He manipulates people, he plays people off against each other, and he's very practiced. And I think we need to change perspective and have look at how a lot of people who vote for Trump are victims of this manipulation. He's an abuser in a way. And I think we have to have sympathy. There will be people who support him, who know who he is, but a lot of people are in denial about who he is. They think he's the most persecuted, downtrodden victim of the liberal media elite. They think there's a lawfare campaign against him, and they believe it. They're in echo chambers. They're told constantly he's, going to make America great again. And if you're in an echo chamber, you're going to believe that. So it's a question of misinformation. Propaganda is very effective. Like, it's doing its job. Propaganda is meant to put your message out there. And Trump is very good in terms of propaganda.
I can see how some hardcore Trump supporters could be described as cult members, but I can also see a lot of people watching this saying, we actually just like his policies. We feel we don't want our taxes raised. We agree with him vis-a-vis China. We want to be strong internationally, or whatever explanation they may have that supports their point of view. 74 million people. Are you saying they're all members of a cult?
So I'm acknowledging 74 million people voted for Donald Trump in the last election.
This interview is 3 years old, so he's talking about the 2016 election here, not the last election.
But I would doubt that most of them believe that Donald Trump is an agent of God or has all of the answers. I think many of them who voted for him were already Republican, for example, or they bought into the disinformation campaign against the Democratic Party. But for me, the real sign of a cult member is the inability to see the possibility that the leader could be bad or wrong.
I see this constantly. Any criticism of Trump where you say, well, he's a 34-time convicted felon, accused of sexual assault, sexual misconduct 26 times, found liable for sexual abuse, he's a rapist, friend with Epstein. You get complete denial, complete disavowal. He is not this person. So that's the single most important sign, the fact that he's untouchable, he's above the law, above criticism, and he can do anything. Famously, he said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and I would not lose support. That is a cult leader. That's the sign of a cult leader.
Do you think Donald Trump set out to be a cult leader, or did it simply transpire on its own because of his style and ideology?
I think Donald Trump got to the place of running the cult of Trump through his upbringing, through his father, Fred, who was an authoritarian and reportedly said to him and his brother, you are a killer, you are a king, you are a killer, you are a king, over and over again, but also exposed his children to a cultish, Christian-esque type group that was very magical thinking, believe and you will succeed, doubts is evil. So he learned thought stopping, which is a mind control technique, as an early child. Of course, then he was sent to a military academy as well. That also kind of groomed him. But the bottom line was that he was a clone of his father, Fred, and he did all of his business practices as a narcissist that wanted total obedience and control. And it was only later that he was recruited by authoritarian cult people as a good figurehead for them to have political influence and power.
What kind of people are...
It's kind of crazy, but we need to see Trump as also a victim of his horrible father, and his dad was horrible. And it's crazy to think, but obviously Trump is a product of his environment, like anyone else. Like he's doing what he was told. He's doing what his dad brought him up to be, and in that way, it's kind of we need to take a step back and think, who is Donald Trump? Because there's so much misinformation about him. If people actually knew how he was brought up, what his dad was like, the coldness of his dad, the relationship with his dad, I think people, again, it's all about information. That's it. Like the propagandist, the cultist controls the information, and every bit of information about Trump is controlled. They don't believe it. Anything against him, they do not believe.
Receptive to being in a cult or following a cult-like leader?
So people are typically very susceptible to the appeals of a destructive cult because of deception. And that's a very important point the public needs to understand, that intelligent, educated people don't go, you know what, I want to be abused and exploited and be part of an authoritarian cult that breaks the laws. No, the appeals are to grandiosity, make America great again, we're going to restore democracy, we're going to drain the swamp, etc. So there are very deceptive appeals. But essentially, in my research of over 40 years, people are in vulnerable moments in their life where they'll be more receptive to a recruitment message or recruiter. So death of a loved one, illness, dislocation, losing a job. I mean, seriously, the pandemic and the economic problems are huge susceptibility factors for the public going forward. Destabilizing a country, group's economic status is a major technique for doing mind control on people, because you want to disorient people, you want to confuse people, you want to make people search for meaning and hope outside of the existing institutional structures. So the susceptibility of people now to look to, well, who knows the solution to the problem of how to make the world a better place now. Unfortunately, the human mind responds to certainty. And cult leaders are very good at talking in a way that's very convincing.
Proud citizens like you help build this country, and together we are taking back our country. Our fight to drain the Washington swamp and reclaim America's destiny has just begun.
This kind of communication kind of accesses people's emotional brain, not their critical thinking part, but their emotional brain of, well, maybe he seems to sound confident, maybe he can do something because things are so bad.
What you're saying is he preyed on people's economic anxiety?
So Donald Trump...
Massively, but also the fact that he is so black and white, his certainty, like he's going to do this, they are the enemies, I'm going to come and make a... He is so good at that, and people believe it. Like people want to hear what they want to hear, and he's very good at telling people what they want to hear. Fear tactics of like, they're coming to get your jobs, they're coming to get your women. He is textbook cult leader, and the beauty is people don't see it. That's how it's so effective, because he's doing it on such a mass scale that people think, oh no, cult's a little religious sects in the forest. No, he is leader of the biggest cult in the world, and his supporters are unaware of it. It's amazing how amazingly effective Trump is.
Used in his recruitment and indoctrination into becoming the president, identifying key groups of people and their unique vulnerabilities, or what buttons could be pushed to motivate them to become followers. And a lot of data was gathered on American citizens to know exactly which buttons to push. Someone's religious and they don't like abortion, press that button. Someone's a gun owner, they want the NRA. So people are transformed or radicalized, depending on the words, through a systematic social influence process. And in my research, working with Chinese communist brainwashing patterns, for example, I've identified behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control as the 4 overlapping variables that, when applied to people, and I should add, in this day and age, it's coming to us through digital media. It's coming to us through our smartphones if we're signing up for certain sites or watching certain YouTubes, etc., that people can be systematically influenced. And without knowledge and education about how mind control works and the differences between ethical and unethical influence, people are sitting ducks, in my opinion.
And it's true, because the legacy media, mainstream media, has been so delegitimized, and in some cases, this is a good thing, but also the fact that now anybody on YouTube, anyone can have a channel and just spread lies and misinformation. There's no fact checking, there's no oversight. This is where we live in a post-truth era where anyone can say anything and people believe it. The mainstream media, which actually I would trust the mainstream media now, they're over anybody who supports Trump. This is the world we live in. It's very difficult to fight misinformation when anybody can have a YouTube channel. They can say whatever they want and they can be believed. Whereas people who have journalistic standards where they have to give the evidence, the facts, there's actually ethics, there's actual structures and oversight. No, they're the ones who are lying. We literally do live in that upside down mirror world where everything's the opposite of how it seems. And how do you fight that? Because you're fighting with the definition of reality here. And that's what being in a cult is. They have a different reality. They have a different world where they will project that onto us and say, no, you're the one in the cult. And it's like, oh, how do you deal with that? Because you're not dealing with rationality.
What role does Fox News play in all of this?
Fox News is part of the media program. I describe in The Cult of Trump that, for example, Alex Jones would take a disinformation story from Russia Today media, broadcast it, it would be picked up by Breitbart, then picked up by Fox. And so there was this radicalization of the conservative media to off-the-charts deception and manipulation and disinformation.
I'm sure there are conservative right-wing people who feel the media on the other side is guilty of brainwashing individuals. What would you say to that?
So I get told all the time that I am brainwashed by the left-wing media, etc. And what I say is that the actual behaviors are what one needs to look at, and the specific journalistic practices need to be tested to see whether or not something has fact-based and evidence-based or pure lies and propaganda.
How did this cult be?
And that does not happen because they don't care about the truth. About Donald Trump, they don't actually care. You can point it out to them and it's pure denial because essentially they don't care. I think some people who support, the fact, because there are supporters of Trump who know who he is, but they just don't care. They want him to do what they want him to do. Mass deportations, tax cuts for the rich, own it to the libs. That's what they want. Undermine trans rights. So, yeah, it's very difficult to fight this stuff.
Behavior play out in what happened at the U.S. Capitol?
So what we saw in the riots and the invasion of the Capitol has actually been foretold for months. I've been talking about it. When I wrote the Cult of Trump book in 2019, I said, if he doesn't get reelected, there's going to be violence. Let's not forget Jim Jones and what happened when he was exposed. he ordered not only the killing of Congressman Leo Ryan, but his followers as well. I said it does not go well with malignant narcissist cult leaders being threatened by the law and for abuse of power.
Many of the people were.
And that's the threat we face in 4 years' time. Will Trump leave the office, the Oval Office, when it comes time? That's the question you've got to ask yourself, because Stephen Hassan predicted in 2019 that Trump would rile up violence, and then we had the insurrection. Trump ain't going easily in 4 years' time.
Were arrested, they lost their jobs. Do you think this will be an aha moment for some of the president's followers?
Well, I do think because of the failed coup attempt and Michael Pence and Mitch McConnell and others saying, no, the election is certified, I think there are more and more people getting disillusioned because they've been so indoctrinated to believe that Trump is the proper winner of the election, when of course he hasn't been. And I think at the point that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are inaugurated, I think we're going to see a larger group of people falling away from this totalist mindset of believing in Donald Trump.
Is there hope for this country?
Well, that hasn't happened, has it? In the last 3 years, it's actually reinforced it. And that just shows you the power of the cult of Trump, is that the more criminal acts he does, the more lies he spills, the more people are convinced by it.
Country, or will someone in the future simply step into Donald Trump's shoes?
So I am an optimist. I do believe there's hope for the country, but I think we need to open our eyes and roll up our sleeves, and we need to do a lot of learning about how the mind works, how influence work, educate young people about their civic duties. I think we need to install many more checks and balances into our democracy. And I'm a big free speech advocate, but the law says you're not free to yell fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire. And what Donald Trump has been doing for all these years is yelling a lot of fires where there was none, or making lies up like he won the election by a landslide when there's no evidence to support that big lie.
I know.
So, again, we're not replacing Trump. Trump is such a unique figure in politics. He's uniquely charismatic, funny. People love him. So when he dies in a few years, I mean, he drinks 12 cans of Diet Coke a day. He'll be dead soon. Who's going to replace him? JD Vance? Okay. Well, okay, so how do we deal with the cult of Trump? Well, on one hand, you've got to deal with them as victims of a narcissistic, lying manipulator, a controller of people. He uses people against other people. And we need to recognize that people have been caught up in the lies and misinformation and have sympathy with that. So on an interpersonal level, one-to-one level, family members, yeah, you can talk to people about it and be like, okay, so what policies? Probe into it over time and just introduce facts, introduce counter evidence, and just hope that people over time, you be, again, sympathetic, empathetic, listen to them and offer alternative views. That might work, it might not. But I think on a broader media scale, we just need to obviously debunk the lies. But what we need to do is attack him, because the Liberals were too weak, too limp in their attacks on Trump. A good example of them being strong was when Kamala Harris, in one of the TV debates, went for Trump's ego. And that's where you've got to attack him where it hurts. Attack him on the basis of the numbers. People were leaving his rallies, and that really hurt him. You could see that really hurt him. That's because he loves those rallies. And the fact that people were leaving, they were putting up black curtains to make it seem like the stadiums were smaller than they were. Go for his ego. Attack him. Attack him for his lies. Attack him for his small hands. For the fact he's had a hair transplant. Just go for him. You got to attack him and go for his ego, his weaknesses. Talk about his father. Talk about why his father never loved him. Talk about his friends, his relationship with Epstein. Talk about his relationship with women. Does he have a fear of women? Why is he so scared of women? Why does he treat women this way? You've got to go for his ego. Go for his weak spots. Attack, attack, attack. Call out the lies. Call out the misinformation. 30,000 lies in your first term of office. Can you beat that record, Donald, in this time? Maybe make it 50,000? Attack, attack. Attack him. Have sympathy for the victims of him. I think that's how we've got to do it. And sometimes when people deny it and don't even, there will be people who know he's lying, know who he is. You've got to mock them. Mock them. Stupid. Why do you support a rapist? Why do you support a criminal? Why do you support someone who's not going to help anybody but the billionaires, the ruling class? He doesn't care about the working class. He cares about sex, power, and money. He's a cult leader. He's a manipulator. He's a liar. And he doesn't care about you. So, again, have sympathy, but attack Trump. Call him out on his lies. So, comment below. How would you know you're in a cult? How would you know that? And I'll see you in the next video.